Good evening, dyes and ghouls. And welcome to our Halloween episode, featuring one of the classics of slasher fame, the Candyman. Hey, no, not you, the other one. Get out of here. I'm talking about the murder ghost Candyman. Very little actual candy involved in the movie.
Too bad. The more candy around, the less people want cake. That's why this is my favorite holiday.
I thought it was the booze and slutty get-ups.
Goddamn, I love Halloween. And I didn't even hate this movie, despite my general dislike for horror films.
Is it all the knives?
Yes, it's the knives, of course. They're a cake's natural enemy.
Well, not to worry. We're planning a perfectly paired, on-theme treat for this tricked-out Halloween special. Honeycomb candy! An old-school classic that'll for sure distract any hungry viewers from contemplating your dry, stale ass.
Hey, at least I have an ass, Flatsy.
Fair. As for the rest of you, buckle up, because you just might get hooked on Candyman.
Sequels excluded.
Oh, dear God, yeah, no. Terrible.
Now, before anyone gets all whiny, we're just covering the 20th century Candyman movies. Candyman, Candyman Farewell to Flesh, and Candyman Day of the Dead. Candyman from 2021 seems like a whole new generation, and we're going to focus in on the pure 90s horror and progressively shittier 90s horror of the original three.
So let's start out with the OG, Candyman. Based on a Clive Barker short story, The Forbidden. Yeah, all his stuff is named like that. Our story begins with a couple of graduate students, Helen and Bernadette, studying urban legends for their thesis. They've been told about the story of Candyman, an undead murderer who can be summoned by speaking his name 5 times in a mirror, a la Bloody Mary.
Kids got too much time on their hands. 5 chance, and whatever happened to thrice and nice?
Candyman severely overestimates the attention span of Zoomers. He's gonna have to take that down to 3 for the TikTok generation.
Helen and Bernadette scoff until a housekeeper spills about a real murder at Cabrini Green. A lady got hooked through her bathroom mirror.
Helen thinks it would be a super great idea to go to Cabrini Green, an area known for violence, gang activity, and very limited police power, to investigate. Just her and Bernadette, to see where a woman was murdered, with the killer still at large.
Horror movie rule number 1. White woman does something stupid, shit hits fan.
Case in point, before they head out to Cabrini Green, they definitely call the Candyman before they go. You know, just for shits and giggles. At least Bernadette has enough sense not to complete the ritual. She's the only one with a good noodle in this picture.
Bernadette rolls in armed to the teeth. Mace, taser, the little thing where you put your car keys in your knuckles, you name it. She's prepared.
Whereas Helen not only just strolls into the building, trying her best to ignore the scary dudes catcalling them from the entrance, but jogs straight into the apartment where the murder happened, dives through the murder hole in the bathroom wall, and takes a tour of the murderer's hidey hole apartment.
It's covered in graffiti, including the iconic image of a giant mouth with a doorway as the open gullet. $3,400 a month in New York. And particularly scary for someone like me, of the foodish persuasion. Helen heads back out and they end up meeting a local resident, Anne Marie McCoy.
She's a single mother working hard to raise her infant son away from the gang's influence. She definitely believes in the Candyman, though, and warns the students about hanging around Cabrini Green for long.
Helen and Bernadette then head to a dinner date with Trevor, Helen's asshole professor husband, who's probably definitely cheating on her, and Purcell, played by Benjamin Franklin Stephen Fry. Purcell is hella condescending about their project, saying he wrote a book on it years ago.
Of course he did.
Candyman, he says, was in real life a free black man in the 1800s who grew up to be an artist known for his portrait work.
He ends up falling in love with a rich white woman who becomes pregnant. Her father is less than pleased, so in typical horrifying racist fashion, he rounds up a screaming mob of townsfolk to kill the artist. They cut off his hand, jammed a hook in the stump, and stripped him nude to smear him in honey, weird turn, and have a bunch of bees swarm him and kill him with all their stings. Then they burned his body right where Cabrini stands to this day.
Dun dun dun, a classic.
Fun fact, Tony Todd, who plays the Candyman, got to make up this backstory, which just goes to show that Clive Barker is a vague motherfucker, because his murderer in the story had no backstory whatsoever, and also looked like a clown instead of the handsomest of all slasher killers in a kick-ass coat.
He makes Freddie, Michael, Jason all feel real self-conscious when they go to the same murder convention.
Helen heads back to Cabrini Green for some toilet photography. Yeah, don't ask. It's much worse than you think. Gets jumped and IDs her attacker to the cops. This pisses off the real killer, Candyman, duh, who definitely wants that credit. And he shows up to serenade her into a trance with that velvet voice.
And they actually hypnotize the actress. So the director, Bernard Rose, could use a code word to put her in a trance state for her scenes with Candyman. Very trusting, that Virginia Madsen. Not a lot of young women would,
Or should.
let a director basically mind wipe her for long stretches.
It was pretty important to the director that there not be a ton of screaming. Candyman's hypnotism is strong stuff too, because Helen wakes up covered in blood in Anne-Marie's apartment with a decapitated dog and Anne-Marie's infant son, MIA. She's arrested, bailed, then rearrested when Candyman immediately kills her best friend in her home. Straight to the loony bin she goes. Yay.
When they finally let her off the Haldol Express, a whole month has passed. So Helen gets her therapist killed by calling Candyman using a mirror in the therapist's office. She meant to do it to prove that Candyman was real, which I guess she did, but only to the therapist for only a few seconds before he, bled out all over the hospital linoleum.
She executes a pretty flawless escape after that, evading capture by swapping clothes with a nurse and booking it back to her in Trevor's apartment.
Couldn't have planned a better escape. Has she done this before? Or were mental hospitals just kind of lax back then?
But surprise, surprise, Trevor's already shacked up with and moved on with one of his undergrads who's repainting the apartment Pepto-Bismol pink.
Yeah.
Sure, Helen's upset at the portrayal of her husband, but I like to think she's more upset at the color scheme.
And they definitely think she's gonna stab them. She does look pretty stabby, to be fair.
Man, I was hoping for it.
Oh yeah, that motherfucker deserves it.
Those walls, horrible.
No, the husband!
Oh yeah, him too.
Helen bolts back to Candyman's artsy murder crib. He's offering a baby for life exchange. Her life.
And Anne-Marie's baby. What we've gathered is that Candyman lives as long as there are rumors and fears surrounding his legacy. As long as his story lives on, so does he. So like a regular artist. Which is why he says Helen will be immortal too, just as all his victims are, since they live on in the terrifying tales to spread to warn others.
Not really the kind of immortality people normally wish for, but whatever. Honestly, Helen's pretty much all crazy at this point, so I think she just wants everything to be over. She finds the entrance to a loft above the murder apartment that now has way more graffiti, plus several detailed murals detailing the story of the Candyman, specifically the birth of the myth, his murder.
Also a candlelit shrine. Is this a murder scene or date night?
It's a metaphor, you Philistine.
Save it for the review.
Fine. So Helen stabs Candyman, who's surprisingly cool with it, and then he basically convinces her to let him kill her. He picks Helen up and places Helen on the altar. And just let me point out how huge Tony Todd is. He's like 6'5" or something. Even if he didn't have natural presence, he would still have presence, you know what I mean?
He looms and we're here for it. And then he has bees in his mouth. Real bees! They were apparently young bees, so they didn't have mature stingers yet and couldn't fly, but still. And see those bees raining down on Helen's face? Her actress, Virginia Madsen, is allergic to bees. Talk about devotion to the craft, girl.
Insane. Also, if you look closely, you might just recognize some of these bees. The handler also worked on My Girl and The Deadly Bees. Oh God, what a title.
Kind of on the nose.
Yeah, that Macaulay Culkin, man, that's a guy who can really take a sting, let me tell you. He's a master of penetration.
The two have a crunchy bee kiss. Helen faints, honestly the correct response, wakes up and bam, Candyman and the baby are gone. Talk about getting ghosted. Ah!
If I had legs, I would ghost you too.
But you don't. God is cruel.
Helen gets up to see that the mural showing his origin story has a new addition. The woman he fell in love with that earned the ire of the townsfolk. A woman that bears a striking resemblance to Helen.
Oh yeah, that sweet plot. Finally, after all this time.
She catches a glimpse of the big pile of garbage the residents of Cabrini Green have collected for their big bonfire night, and realizes Candyman must have taken the baby there. She grabs his hook and climbs into the pile, following the baby's screams. But little Jakey spots her in the pile and thinks it's the Candyman. And this is the chance to rid themselves of their resident vengeful spirit once and for all. They set the pile ablaze just as Helen finds the baby.
And just as Candyman finds Helen again, he tells her they'll be together forever, their ashes combining as one. How romantic.
But Helen is having none of that bullshit. She stabs him and manages to crawl out of the bonfire to give the baby back to his mother, safe and sound, as Candyman burns into a cloud of flaming bees. Helen dies of her burns. Side note, the same team that did the effects for Backdraft did the design of that bonfire. Those are real flames, folks. No optical effects. What a badass.
We're not sure if this movie ends with Helen being cleared posthumously of the murders, since she obviously couldn't have kidnapped the baby and kept it alive while she was in a mental hospital. But whatever happened, the whole of Cabrini Green shows up at her tiny funeral, along with Trevor and his Pepto-Bimbo. It looks like Anne-Marie and those that lived around her understood that Helen had been a victim too, like so many around them had been.
And that would have been a great ending on its own. But I super like the final scene anyway.
Oh yeah. We get a final scene at what was once Helen and Trevor's apartment, now Trevor and Undergrad's pink love shack. Trevor is a mess. He's remembering all the good times with his wife, how great she was, all the things she did for him, the love, the caring. The Undergrad doesn't get it and is sent off to make dinner. Trevor tries to pull himself together in the bathroom, calling out to his lost wife. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5.
What's the matter, Trevor? Scared of something?
Oh, man. The only deserved death in this movie, and it feels good. But wow, did a whole lot happen in the second half of this flick. There was so much build-up.
The music really helped build the horror blue balls. Philip Glass, a notable art fuck, did the score, and it just builds and builds the tension. We can't let you listen to it without risking the band hammer, but here's a sound alike that will give the impression.
It fits because this barely feels like a horror film. It feels like an art film. It feels like it's sending me a message about inner city life and racism and the hypocritical condescension of academia, whereas most popular horror of this time was hot tits get stabbed.
We did get some side boob though, which brands this as horror. If we had the whole rack and loose dick, it would be full art film.
Too true. Those are the rules. What was crazy was the impact of the titular Candyman. He leaves such a mark as the killer, not just in the film, but in the horror zeitgeist. Yet he only has like 10 minutes of actual screen time. Tony Todd really took just scraps of a character and built us a tapestry. He has gravitas. He's intimidating. He's sympathetic. The man has an ascot.
He is a very stylish murderer indeed.
And he spots a ton of cool lines like, "What's blood for but for shedding?"
As for our deaths, there is nothing to fear. Our names will be written on 1,000 walls, our crimes told and retold by our faithful believers.
Honestly, I was ready to be killed after that one, but I live in a constant state of horny and depressed, so yeah.
Most of his lines are pulled directly from the Clive Barker story, even when everything else in the movie was pretty far removed, honestly. For instance, the story took place in Liverpool, England, not Chicago. And it never mentioned anything about race, even though I think it's pretty commonly inferred that this movie was trying to say something about race, racism, and the long-term effects of prejudice.
It's a heck of a lot more deep than, say, Friday the 13th, which made the statement, horny bad.
Or The Human Centipede, which was just a sicko's attempt to see if he could make a movie gross and horrible enough that people wouldn't pay to go see it, which he couldn't. Humans are terrible. Speaking of, fun fact, this movie was also inspired by a real murder at the real Cabrini Green in Chicago. A young woman was really killed by a man who broke through her bathroom mirror into the apartment next door.
Oh, you think that's scary? That's nothing. Tony Todd only got this role because they couldn't afford who they really wanted to play Candyman, Eddie Murphy.
Now that's terrifying.
And Sandra Bullock as Helen.
Now that's terrifying!
Unlike the Candyman sequels, which took all the good stuff from the original and gutted it from going to gullet. Listen, folks, they're not good, so we're gonna speedrun this.
But first, let's have a snack break. Remember I mentioned snacks earlier? Well, here's our tasty treat pairing for this episode. Honeycomb candy! It's called that for a cool lattice pattern inside the candy.
Ooh, it looks tasty. And the shards remind me of my favorite part of the movie.
The side boob? The bee kiss?
Better.
Ah, yes. Cinema at its finest. And if you want to enjoy that scene with your own shard of honey, we've given you the recipe in the description below. We used honey from our local farmer's market because we're bougie. But you can use bees from your own local murder ghost.
He doesn't let me in his garden anymore.
You know what you did.
I'm doing it again tonight. Now let's move on so I can eat that candy off screen with no judgment.
The second movie, Candyman Farewell to the Flesh, attempts to flesh out the backstory of Candyman. We're introduced to Annie Tarrant, an art teacher in New Orleans. Her father is dead, her mother is dying of cancer, and probably alcoholism, and her brother just got arrested for allegedly murdering that asshole professor we met in the first movie. But the viewer knows it was the Candyman. Who's back?
The Tarrants are old money. Like, they own a plantation, but don't talk about it, old money.
But Annie is a sympathetic character. She works with orphans in a group home, and she cares so much about these kids that, to prove Candyman isn't real, she does the summoning, like an idiot.
Immediately, Candyman shows up to kill her husband and tell her she's pregnant with a daughter, which Candyman is for some reason very interested in. It's honestly creepy. Candyman is written full creepy in this one instead of compelling.
One of Annie's students has also gone missing, and when she goes to his house to speak to his father, finds out that the student has been having dreams about the Candyman. This is never explained. Annie also keeps having these little fugue states, seeing visions of Candyman's origin story.
She finds out her father was obsessed with the Candyman stories, as well as her brother, both of whom got help from this old guy selling snow cones. He, for some reason, has a back room full of old shit, including a painting of the woman Candyman, real name Daniel Robitussin, fell in love with and was subsequently killed for, Caroline. Now we find out that the racist mob that killed him also had a mirror that his soul is now bound to, or something. Then old guy gets very killed.
Oh, and yeah, a big part of these sequels is just people around a woman getting murdered because she made a bad choice. That and trying to make Candyman's backstory both more convoluted and as cliche as possible.
And also completely worthless because they don't stick to the lore anyway. Remember Candyman was murdered by an angry racist mob and burned after being stung to death by bees? Well, Annie visits his very nice burial site in a church cemetery next to the white woman he was murdered for loving. Make that make sense.
And Caroline's grave says she was a mom, conveniently, so now we know Candyman's bloodline continues. Or Caroline had a kid by another guy, but probably not, right? Surely the daughter of a rich racist murderer wouldn't make her marry a man of his choosing after the love of her life dies, right? Right?
Anyway, I think you all know where this is going, because it was telegraphed all the hell. Yup. Annie is Candyman's whatever great-great-grandkid, and she's super mad at her mom who knew and did not tell her. But, why would she? Why would you tell your kid, hey, by the way, you're related to a guy that was brutally murdered and might be an evil ghost?
I mean, that's pretty cool, but what isn't cool is Candyman still being kind of sexy about killing his grandkid. Like, he's acting the same way he was with Helen in the first one, when she was supposed to be like the reincarnation of his lost love, or at least it was kind of intimated that. It's really incesty and not fun.
And Annie has to destroy Candyman by destroying that special mirror that, weirdly enough, got hidden away in the old slave quarters of her family's plantation.
She manages to stay alive from both the Candyman trying to gut her and nearly being drowned by the flooding Mississippi with the help of several children, the one that was missing from before being one of them. Together they smash the mirror, destroying the anchor of Candyman's soul and banishing him forever.
Oh, you can't be that naive.
A gal can live in hope. Anywho, we end on Annie tucking in her daughter, named after Candyman's lover, Caroline? Really? While the kid almost summons the Candyman again.
Because kids are idiots.
Really, the worst thing about this movie, besides the trite plot, the almost incest feels, the boring kills, and even more boring characters, is the Kingfish.
Are you with me, Gnarly? Do you hear me? This is the Kingfish coming to you at 96.2 FM.
The whole movie has this voiceover by an obnoxious New Orleans radio DJ, and it definitely feels like something the studio shoehorned in during the post-production period. They saw the first movie and said, "There's too many scenes with no talking. We need someone talking in every scene, please." And then just dubbed in this random gibbering idiot with a Creole accent. It's infuriating and ruins any sense of mystery or atmosphere that this movie could have possibly had.
But even that flick had more going on for it than the third one, Candyman Day of the Dead. It doesn't even have Philip Glass's soundtrack. In this one, Annie's daughter Caroline is all grown up now and living in LA. Annie did a real shit job preparing little Caroline because this gal, again, almost immediately does the mirror summoning after a little peer pressure from this sleazy art gallery owner, Miguel. They had put together an art show of Daniel Robitaille's paintings, and Miguel decided the best way to get people to come in was to play up the murdery urban legends. Even got a friend of his to pretend to crash the gallery with a hook, yelling about the curse of the Candyman to freak people out and get the buzz going. Honestly, that was probably a good business decision.
Miguel and the naked girl he was about to bang are the first victims, obviously. She's eating a honeycomb, and these CGBs are very offended.
Yeah, another sign that this movie sucks is the amount of tits we see. That's how this works. The worse the plot and acting, the more nudity.
It's the areola sliding scale.
I hate that, and I hate that it's true. We actually saw the trailer for this first, and when we saw the lead actress, immediately thought she was a former porn star trying to break into regular Hollywood.
Turns out we were almost right. Donna D'Errico was a playmate in 1995 who had just finished her run on Baywatch. So half the time we see her, she's in her underwear.
But she keeps it mostly tasteful, except for the scene after she finds, her friend Miguel's mutilated corpse where she's crying naked in the shower. Very unnecessary.
Not to horny teenagers.
Anyway, it turns out that all Robitaille's paintings have been stolen while the murder was happening. Also, we find out that Annie, Caroline's mom, the tough lady that banished Candyman after watching her mother and husband be brutally murdered, she slit her own throat in the bathtub, which kind of fucked up her daughter a little bit, And remember we mentioned the tits? The gal who plays the mother, and her mother's tortured shade brought back to torment Caroline, goes full frontal in pretty much every scene she's in. Lots of blood-colored boobs out, and proud in front of your kid and your several times great-grandpa. Still with the weird incesty shit. Blah.
There's also racist cops trying to pin the murder on that guy hired to scare people at the gallery opening, David, and David's grandmother, who is some kind of shaman who tells Caroline that everything has good and evil. So to stop the evil, she has to destroy its good.
Does that make sense?
It doesn't have to. Let's just get through this.
Good idea. All the deaths are super obvious and usually have a fake out right before. Caroline's roommate is heard screaming and begging off screen, so Caroline rushes to her aid to find out the roommate was practicing for her role in a horror movie, but then is murdered. Caroline gets arrested for the murders, and the cop in the car with her mocks her fear of the Candyman by pretending to see him. Oh no, ha 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 ha, you're stupid, but then is murdered. It's extremely formulaic and very uninteresting.
And again, the main character has to destroy something linked to the Candyman's past to stop him. This time, his paintings, I guess. And if that grandma thought those paintings were Candyman's good, then I don't think she ever saw them. Van Gogh, they ain't.
You mean those middle school yearbook photographs with fake brushstrokes? Not exactly inspiring. But they were to this goth gang that stole the paintings in the first place. Yeah, you heard that right. Goth gang.
These methed out emos are the new Church of Candyman, who summon him to be a part of his congregation. His faithful. And they're dead. Like you said, it's boring.
Caroline ends up destroying the paintings and banishing the Candyman, almost despite her best efforts. She's a super ineffectual heroine, and I honestly pity her.
And they end up pinning all the murders on a racist cop who tries to drunkenly murder her with a hook as soon as Candyman poofs off to hell or whatever. The cop takes a swing at her with a hook and gets conveniently shot in the back of the head by a good cop. His last words, somehow not immediately dead by that headshot, are Candyman. So that's a confession, right?
Good enough for me. Because now it's finally over, as the myth was destroyed and the murders were attributed to a real flesh and blood killer. The Candyman story is complete. Or is it? Oh, wait, it is. That was just another fake-out dream. Or was it? Oh, yes, it was. Oh, I hate this. I'm not kidding. There was another fake-out right at the end. I wanted to kill myself.
Are those your final words about this picture?
Yes. I hate it. These are my final words.
Then it's time to be my victim. Irma.
Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah! Oh, my eyes! My eyes! Ah! Ah!
That's the wrong movie. Now you're getting double murdered. Come here.
No.
Get over here so I can murder you.
Now.
Who can rip your heart out?
Butcher you with
ease.
Live beyond his death and summon up a swarm of bees. The Candyman can!
The Candyman. Alright. We're done, right?
Yeah, that was it.
Put me in my fucking trailer. I'm done with this.